All right, let's dive right into this explainer. The 2-year window from 1945 to 1947 in India was, well, it was a literal pressure cooker. We're talking about a period defined by incredibly intense, chaotic negotiations at the very top, while at the exact same time, massive, explosive rebellions were just tearing through the streets. This is the volatile span of time that ultimately shattered British rule for good and laid the groundwork for the end of an empire.
So, to understand exactly how this unprecedented national unity devolves so rapidly into violent polarization, we're going to hit 6 key chapters. We'll look at the post-war pressures, the INA catalyst, the polarized and limited elections, the cabinet mission, the collapse into direct action, and finally, the fragile interim government.
Let's kick things off with Chapter 1, Post-War Pressures, or as I like to think of it, when the heat is applied.
To really set the stage here, we have to look at 2 totally different realities happening at the exact same time. Up at the top level, you had the British government, Congress, and the Muslim League. They're all locked in these exhausting, closed-door negotiations, completely shadowed by communal tension. But down on the ground, totally different story. You had workers, farmers, everyday citizens out in the streets, united in this aggressive, massive mass movement. The tension was just absolutely peaking on both of these levels.
Now you might be wondering, why didn't the British just forcefully shut all these street protests down? Well, it basically comes down to one staggering number: £1.2 billion. After World War II, the British government's confidence and, frankly, their capability was totally shot. Clement Attlee's new Labour government took over in July 1945, and they inherited an economy that was just being crushed by this colossal debt owed directly to India.
The once mighty British Empire was, for all intents and purposes, broke. Plus, global geopolitics had completely shifted. The US and the USSR were the new superpowers on the block, and both of them actually favored Indian independence. Add in the massive anti-imperialist waves sweeping through places like Vietnam and Indonesia, and the British administration was literally terrified of a repeat of the 1942 uprising. Except this time, they wouldn't just be facing unarmed citizens. They'd be up against highly trained Indian National Army soldiers. So, between a totally exhausted military and empty pockets, the British simply didn't have the money or the muscle to crush another revolt.
Which brings us to Chapter 2, the INA catalyst, and how the British accidentally built a whole lot of unintended unity.
So, in November 1945, the British administration decides to make a very public example of captured Indian National Army soldiers by putting them on trial. They placed an Hindu, a Muslim, and a Sikh soldier, Prem Kumar Sahgal, Shah Nawaz Khan, and Gurbaksh Singh Dhillon, together in the dock at the Red Fort, basically to strike fear into the public. But it backfired completely. It was a monumental blunder that ended up unifying the entire nation. It created this crazy historical anomaly where fierce political rivals, we're talking Congress, the Muslim League, the Communist Party, the Akali movement, the RSS, and the Hindu Mahasabha, they all actually joined forces to support the defense. I mean, Jawaharlal Nehru literally put on his barrister's gown for the first time in decades just to defend them. It's a pretty powerful reminder of how a common enemy can, at least temporarily, erase the deepest of divides.
And this unified nationalist sentiment definitely didn't stay polite and confined to the courtroom. It exploded into direct confrontation. Massive revolts tore through Kolkata in November, and then again in February. But the real game changer? That was February 18, 1946, when the Royal Indian Navy soldiers mutinied in Bombay. This wasn't just your average street protest. This was a direct strike at the very heart of the British military apparatus, and it shook the absolute foundations of their control. Naval ships literally lowered the Union Jack and hoisted the flags of Congress, the League, and the Communists, all tied together.
Moving into Chapter 3, Polarized and Limited Elections, where we see all that unity start to fracture.
When the winter elections rolled around, that incredible solidarity we just saw in the streets split sharply along religious lines. The Congress Party completely dominated the non-Muslim electoral landscape. They captured a massive 91% of the non-Muslim vote, securing 57 out of the 102 Central Assembly seats. But flip over to the other side, and we see an equally polarized result. The Muslim League absolutely swept all 30 reserved central seats, taking 86.6% of the Muslim vote. This firmly cemented their status as the dominant representative among Muslims. And compared to the previous elections back in 1937, this was a drastic, tension-building shift.
But hold on, because there's a massive catch to this extreme political polarization. It was basically an illusion, magnified by the structural rules of the time. Get this,
The right to vote was restricted to less than 10% of the population for provincial assemblies and less than 1% for the Central Assembly. So that amazing unity of the everyday masses on the streets, it was completely carved up at the ballot box by this tiny elite voting population. It practically guaranteed a total political deadlock.
Now for Chapter 4, the Cabinet Mission. This was the last attempt, the failing safety valve.
Realizing the whole situation was rapidly spiraling out of control, a high-level British delegation arrived in the sweltering heat of March 1946. Their core objective was incredibly ambitious. They wanted to execute a peaceful transfer of power, but crucially, they wanted to keep a united India as a Commonwealth defense ally after they left. The problem? The fundamental roadblock was still there. Congress had this unwavering desire for a united nation, while the Muslim League was steadfast in their demand for partition.
So, to try and solve this seemingly impossible puzzle, the mission proposed a highly complex, three-tiered grouping system in May 1946. It essentially rejected a fully separate Pakistan, but attempted to grant regional autonomy to Muslim-majority areas instead. They grouped the country into three sections: Section A for Hindu-majority provinces, Section B for Northwest Muslim-majority provinces, and Section C for Northeast Muslim-majority provinces.
It was a remarkably delicate and fragile federal structure. They'd create a 389-member constituent assembly. To satisfy the Muslim League, provinces would receive maximum autonomy and all the residual powers. But to satisfy Congress, there would still be a united central government. Granted, it would be severely weakened, only controlling defense, communications, and foreign affairs. Oh, and the princely states? They were just freed to choose their own path. It was a classic bureaucratic attempt to please absolutely everyone, which, as we know, usually means pleasing no one.
Let's look at Chapter 5, Collapse and Direct Action. This is where the explosion happens.
For a brief, fleeting moment in the summer of 1946, it actually looked like this delicate plan might work. Both parties formally accepted it in June, but then came July 10th. Jawaharlal Nehru made a fateful statement openly questioning the compulsory nature of the grouping. And since the Muslim League's acceptance was entirely predicated on that very grouping being mandatory, well, this was the pin drop moment that completely shattered the fragile agreement.
Let's trace how terrifyingly fast this went downhill. Right after Nehru's statement on July 10th, the Muslim League immediately withdrew its acceptance of the plan. Then, on August 16, 1946, they called for Direct Action Day. What followed was just a tragic eruption of unprecedented communal violence. Riots literally tore through Kolkata, Noakhali, and Bihar, claiming thousands of lives. Whatever faint hope there was for a peaceful, united transition was entirely consumed by this violence.
Finally, Chapter 6, the Interim Government, a fragile compromise and its dysfunctional aftermath.
So right in the middle of these escalating street riots, they made a desperate last-minute attempt to form a functioning government in September. The Muslim League reluctantly joined in October. But think about it, you had radical opponents forced under one roof with dangerously divided portfolios. Congress held foreign affairs, home, and defense, while the Muslim League held the absolutely crucial finance portfolio. Rather than functioning as a real government, it was basically a recipe for a dysfunctional daily clash. The finance department could effectively block or stall almost anything the defense or home departments tried to execute.
Ultimately, we have to recognize that this wasn't a genuine transfer of power at all. It was merely a temporary, agonizing band-aid. Really, it was just the Viceroy's Executive Council in disguise, frantically trying to manage an unmanageable crisis while the country was literally fracturing beneath it.
We've seen the missed opportunities, the flawed negotiations, and the explosive violence today. But keeping in mind that ideas for a separate nation had already been seeded by intellectuals way back in the 1930s, I want to leave you with this final thought. As the 1947 pressure cooker finally burst, was this polarized interim government doomed from day one? Were the roots of separatism just so deep that the tragedy of partition was completely unavoidable? It's a really profound question to ponder as we reflect on this incredibly volatile path to independence. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.